Well, about, I hate to say this, but almost 37 or 38 years ago, I began my college career, which I never finished. And I started out as a chemist or a chemical engineer. I didn't really decide until I discovered my true love was mathematics, until I discovered my true love was philosophy, until I discovered my true love was mysticism. I got stuck there. I remember almost none of the chemistry. I remember little bits of it. But I do remember some of the experiments, and I was greatly impressed with the very elementary experiment where you make a supersaturated solution, meaning that the water holds more than it's supposed to be able to hold. And it's really neat. And the way you prove it is you make the supersaturated solution and you measure how much goes in, and but you make it when it's warm, and you usually make it with hypo. And then you cool it down. And as it cools down, somehow some of the hypo becomes molecular and gets in between the molecules, I guess, is how it becomes supersaturated. But then there's a point in the experiment where you drop in the teeniest little bit more of hypo after you've cooled it down, and instantaneously all of the extra hypo, the supersaturated part, precipitates to the bottom. And you've got a whole forest of hypo on the bottom. Oh, I forget what it is. It's long. Oh, yes. Yeah, but the hypo was the subject it was the one that is perfect for demonstrating supersaturated solutions. Yes, but at any rate, that is what this course is like. It's on the verge of becoming supersaturated. We began this very, very ongoing course 4 years ago. And we began this subsection on hierarchy over 3 semesters ago. And we began by talking about the nature of spirit, which is the origin of hierarchy. And we told many, many, many stories. And most of them illustrated some point about the nature of spirit first, and eventually about hierarchy. But mostly we took a lot of side trips into the internal mystical content. And we've been building slowly, very slowly. And now we're at a point that we're supersaturated. We're getting to work a lot about, a lot of things are right now about hierarchy. So we're at the point where there is very little story and a lot of philosophical principle. It won't always stay like that, but for a while, for the next, probably this talk and the next 2, it's going to be like that. Little story, much discussion about hierarchy and spiritual principles in it. Now, last time, or the time before last, we talked about things like incest and its effects, both positive and negative, and as a general principle of hierarchy, and we discussed other lovely topics like homosexuality and such, all the normal things. And then last time we talked about the first 2 broods from the incestuous union of Gaia and her son Uranus. And they were the Cyclops, the wheel eyes, and the giants with 100 arms and 50 heads apiece. And this time we're going to talk, for the most part, about the third brood from Gaia and Uranus. It seems like after she got all of the strange stuff out of the way, she had more normal children, but there were a lot of them, and they're called Titans or Lords. So this is going to be a Titanic course, a talk tonight. Even Gaia and Uranus, Aurea and Pontos were also considered Titans, as were Eros and Tartarus. It's not clear that Chaos was. But Titan just means Lord. But that is not the same as gods. We're going to talk about that in the very near future when we talk about the birth of the gods. The Greeks, like all mystical schools, differentiated between the hierarchies, and so the Titans were of a much different order than the gods were. And so there were 12 of them, 6 males and 6 females. Oceanus or Okeanos, Koios, Cryos, Hyperion, Iapetos, Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, Tethys, and finally Kronos. And these are their names interpreted from Greek. Of the swift moon is Okeanos, Koios, intelligent, Cryos, sovereign, Hyperion, moon man, which is kind of funny since he was the lord of the sphere of the sun. Iapetos, hurrier, Theia, divine, Rhea, earth, Themis, order or justice. Themis is the one that we always picture as the sign for Libra, the blindfolded lady with the scales. Mnemosyne, memory, Phoebe, bright moon, Tethys, disposer, and Kronos, black or crow. That's an interesting notion, but I don't know. But most of these are things are beings that we've encountered before. If you remember when we talked about the Placidian creation story, there were 14 of the Titans with the lords and ladies of each of the planetary spheres. And we spoke of them then in that context. And I'd like to go over that. You remember Eurynome, after she had created her husband Ophion and united with him, created the whole cosmos, and then as a final act she created the 14 Titans and had them wear the hats of being the principles of the planetary spheres. And that brings us to our first hierarchical principle of the night. We haven't said anything yet about Titans. And that is that spiritual beings, like us, wear different hats or perform different functions. Sometimes the different functions or positional relationships we have are simultaneously, and sometimes they're sequentially. We can simultaneously be parents, partners, and children. The Greeks had the unusual distinction in the later centuries of the Hellenic era of being teachers to people of whom they were slaves. Most unusual, they were both teacher and slave, and it was a very awkward situation because they were treated with great dignity because they were culturally superior to their masters. However, they weren't stronger. So the principle that we're looking at is a very, very simple principle, and that is hierarchy is relative to function and quality. Very simple. Hierarchy is relative to function and quality. That means to say what has precedence or what is more important depends on what is being done at what stage of the process. So, obviously, somebody who is a doer has more precedence in a doing situation, whereas somebody who is a finisher has more precedence in that. Now, it's an easy principle to state, but it's not an easy principle to live. Keeping all of our roles and our priorities in life is not very easy. Some people are good children, but they prove later in life not to be good parents. There's often a vertical breakdown. Socrates was an excellent marriage partner, but he was a very poor father. So in some cases you have a vertical breakdown. Some people are good workers, but if you raise them up vertically in priority and have them become bosses or superiors, they fail miserably. Some people are good children and good parents, but they're poor partners or they're poor team members or poor co-workers. So some people know how to understand and function in vertical relationships, but have breakdowns in horizontal relationships where equality is what counts, and being able to work in that sphere of equality. Now, there are differences between the original family of Titans in the Olympic cosmogony and the family of Titans that are in the Pleistocene cosmogony. And we'll just state some of those differences because we're trying to get to a point that we can use. The Olympic Titans appear very early in the creation when things are very, very unstable. The Pleistocene Titans appear at the end when things appear to be stable as they are now. You know, the worlds are all in place and all they do is govern them. Some of this could be because of the age of the societies. The Pleistocene was a much older society before the Dorian and Ionian Greeks came in. They were an older society and everything was in place, and so their concept of hierarchy was just one of maintaining the stability. The progenitors and the descendants of the Olympic Titans are the subjects of stories and the origins and antecedents and the stories of the Pleistocene Titans are unmentioned. So even though the same beings are in both places, some are fabled for how they came to be and what they did in the creation, and others are just there. Now the Pleistocene Titans govern, and they govern planetarily, while the Olympians though they do have planetary qualities, they create. And they create more than they govern. In fact, they have difficulties usually with their governance. It would be very interesting to see, because some of the ones that are in the Olympic Titans are not listed among the Plus Aegeans, and some of those among the Plus Aegeans are not mentioned in the Olympics. And I wanted to take the time to compare the two, to compare, because we're going to look at the two types of hierarchies that they are, to see who was included and who was excluded, and that would give us some sort of idea about the nature of the two types of hierarchy. But I didn't have enough time. There's never enough time to do all the things that you want to do. So we'll have to look. I also wanted to do much more with the names, because all of the entire language of Greek, like all of the ancient languages, comes out of names. And there are a lot of things that you can play with the meanings of the words, like Okeanos means of the swift moon, but in other cases it means on high. And there are all kinds of different meanings to them, and by the different inflections of meaning, you can come to metaphysical understandings, because the divinities are literally spiritual beings, and as spiritual beings, their intelligences represent divine creative powers. And what we call laws of nature are really the constant intelligence of various spiritual beings. And to understand, like you can manipulate the formulae that describe principles. You can manipulate them through all sorts of mathematical manipulations. And when you do so, you can measure and understand different things about how physical principles work. The same thing is true, that by looking at the names of divinities in different ways, the spiritual qualities that they represent have different sides to them. But unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to do that. We'd almost have to be studying Greek at the same time, and we're just trying to have fun. We're not. We're going to get something out of this, hopefully, that we can apply to our lives, and we can, if nothing else, edify ourselves by an understanding of the world of the gods. But we're not trying to be especially academic about this. The Olympic Titans, because they are creative, form a vertical hierarchy, where the Plesiogean Titans form a horizontal organization. I would say horizontal hierarchy, but the word horizontal hierarchy would be an oxymoron. Though there is a way that there could be a hierarchy in a horizontal. If we take the standard Christmas tree view of the relationship to the horizontal to the vertical, the branches on a Christmas tree usually form, if you look from the side, you look straight on a Christmas tree, they actually form planes. The hierarchy could be who's closest or furthest from the center. There's a hierarchy that way. It's based on centralization rather than who is above who. But you get the idea of what we're trying to, we're going to play with this whole idea quite a bit. We're going to review some things we did before and carry the notions a little bit further, so that they are things that there are things we haven't developed earlier that we should have developed earlier, but if we try to do too much at one time, it gets awfully cloddy. And even though we're at the point where we're precipitating a supersaturated solution, we don't want to get too heavy. An example, as we have seen before, of a horizontal organization is a color wheel. And that in a color wheel, you have all of the spectral colors, and they're all of equal value. Blue isn't more important than yellow or green or red or orange. They're all of equal value. An example of a vertical hierarchy is something like a chain of command, or a pyramid of command, or a pyramid of axioms. Like the Greeks were very hierarchical about the development of mathematics. They started a few fundamental axioms, and from them they developed a whole pyramid of geometrical understanding of mathematics. An example of a composite horizontal and vertical hierarchy is our old friend the maypole. The maypole, if you remember, is a pole in which you have ribbons attached to it, and you have people dancing, holding the end of a ribbon in hand, and as they dance and go around the pole, the ribbons wrap themselves around the pole so that when you get to the end, everybody collapses at the center of the pole because they've run out of ribbons. And if you look at the pole at that point, if you look at it straight on, it looks like a bunch of bands of the different colors, and it looks like one after another is occupying a different period in time. However, if you walk around the maypole, you'll see that it's all that you can trace back the original. So you have the original horizontal colorings in the May dance in each of the ribbons, and you have the vertical supremacy of the ribbons getting shorter and shorter and shorter, so that gradually you have a spiral at the end that has both the horizontal and the vertical qualities to them. The maypole was lovely for a number of other things, but we don't have time to go into that. In a vertical hierarchy, precedence and differential in power, or creativity, or wisdom, or depth in unity is what counts. That is who has the most power, the most creativity, the most wisdom, or the greatest depth in unity is the most important, or is at the top of the hierarchy. So you might call vertical hierarchy differential hierarchy. In horizontal organization, equality and balance are what is important. Anytime that either of those is broken down, the horizontal organization is lost. Now, this is a really very practical thing. And it's sort of at the root of why we're looking at hierarchy through mythology at all, because it offers us something practical, a way, because in a way we live in chaos every day, because of all of the different relationships we have with all sorts of different people. It's very hard to sort out and separate what is important and what isn't important. So this looks like it's going to be a short talk. We might even be here only 45 minutes. I don't believe it, but so we're going to try and look at these practical things. In our daily lives, which are cosmos, it pays to recognize what kind of hierarchy we are working with in any given situation. In general, before we can apply anything, awareness or recognition is most important. In our spiritual exercise that we try to do every day, there are the 4 R's, and they themselves have a sequence. Recognition, remorse, repentance, restitution. So that before we can actually feel what we have done wrong and assimilate the fruits thereof, or before we can feel what we have done right, we must first recognize. We have to see what's there. When we have seen what's there, we can then, and have felt the consequence of it, then we have the energy of it so that we can repent or that we can change. But still, we have some things that need correction, and those require some sort of restitution or creation or change or something like that. But in the beginning, it is always important when we're trying to understand something, in this case hierarchy, it pays to observe and discriminate accurately what our most relevant role is in a situation. Is it vertical? That is superior subordinate. Many times it's both, but with different groups of people. There is an attitude that is regenerate for each. Clearly, if we are in a vertical relationship, we must be inspiring and educating and decisive, or we can be negative in that role and we can be tyrannical or dogmatic. If we are in a subordinate role, we can be obedient. Or, in the negative, we can be sycophantic. And the whole idea is, like any other principle, in a vertical relationship, where we find ourselves in the hierarchy, we must recognize what the vertical role is and what we can do in it and what is the proper performance or the proper functioning in that role versus something that is a destructive one. Clearly, in either case, if we are superior or subordinate, it seems to me that concentration so that we can either understand through our mind or that we can tune in through our intuition, we can find the proper level and we can intuit what the position is that we must take. In either case, the appropriate attitude is helpful both directions. That is, if we are in a place in a chain of command that we are a subordinate, our obedience not only helps us, but our obedience also helps the person who is in the role of being a superior. And vice versa, if we're not tyrannical, but if we are judicious with our eye on the purpose or on the goal of the whole business, as well as on the capabilities of people who are subordinate to us, if we maintain our role properly that way, then it makes it easier for somebody else to be obedient. Very simple. This is ABCDarian talk tonight. Nothing at all heavy, all lightweight. If we look at the other kind of organization, if we are in a horizontal relationship, horizontal organization, we have to look then for the quality. Again, it requires concentration. Exactly what is the quality of my role? Concentration but not to specialized extreme is the same thing that works here. Meaning to say, in this I differentiate from politically correct people and people that I think are trying to making mistakes right now in the gender dilemma. I believe that a good Beatrice makes a good Benedict, and a good Benedict makes a good Beatrice. I don't believe that we should be locked chauvinistically in our sexual role, but we cannot help those in the body of the opposite polarity by trying to be them. I think what happens actually is that if we fulfill our role, those of the opposite polarity can best fulfill their role, and then a common unity seen through the relationship of equals where each one is holding its own part produces the crossover. It's something that occurs of itself through the understanding of unity. My favorite way of looking at that is like looking at a play. A play is something that has a horizontal unity in it. And if you're playing an Iago, and somebody else is playing a Desdemona, and somebody else a Othello, some of the characters may be more likable and some may be less likable, but if each character plays his or her own role in the working out of the drama, there is an understanding of the parts of all of the other roles as they fit in. And you don't have to try to play your role for to the other person's role, to slant it to them. If you just play your own, its quality stands on its own and it does its own. I'm sure that everybody's going to turn me into the politically correct police for my views on this, and I'm sure that some people would label me a sexist for it. I don't know. All right. One of the bigger problems occurs when we confuse the horizontal and the vertical values. When we do that, there's always disaster. If we bring verticality into an organization that calls for horizontal understanding, it brings in disaster. I think I'll just point out some of the disasters that I think come up. One is if a boss tries to be buddy-buddy with the employees. It does. Oh, kids. It turns out to be always a foolish disaster. Another one that is not so simple that I see quite a bit of is when a single parent looks to a child, especially a child of the opposite sex, in the role of a partner. Very unhealthy kind of thing to do. Even trying to have your child be too much of your friend when it's at a young age is not a healthy thing. The child has to be a child, and the child actually needs someone in that vertical role. On the same note, a team member or an actor or an orchestra player cannot upstage an equal and be successful. That if somebody is always trying to be better, it breaks down the entire team concept, or it breaks down the whole organizational. But, nonetheless, I should say, though one can confuse horizontal and vertical relationships, the two, as in the maypole, do have interactions between them. I believe that it is focus on the center and on the vertical, whether it is upward or downward, that makes the horizontal possible. That is to say, it's very much like the principle in physics. We're showing it horizontally. We've got the Christmas tree here. It is the vertical growth of the Christmas tree that the trees that have the strongest leader, and that leader is a strong central trunk, that have the most horizontally developed limbs. So that if you look at something like a spruce or something like that, the limbs come off almost at right angles. It is a principle, the way we measure everything in physics, that fields develop perfectly at right angles to a directed line of force, whether that, no matter what direction, but we're talking about it in horizontal and vertical. The more intensely directed that line of force is, the more at right angles a force field forms around it. And it is horizontal in the sense that it is passive and that it is a byproduct of different stages of an advancing development. So then, that in order, what we're trying to say then is that if we have a very good sense of vertical or forward hierarchy, if we have goals and purposes, or if we have ambition and purposes, and because we're talking about in the mandala, purpose is found in the 9th house, and ambition is found in the 10th house. The facilitation of purpose comes from ideals, and the facilitation of ambition comes from goals. And the more that we function within ideals and goals, the more we can see, or the more, just like the tree, the more we develop a field, a horizontal field around us of what is necessary in becoming. So there is a relationship that between the horizontal and the vertical. The stronger the vertical is, the more clearly defined the horizontal becomes. On one hand, we cannot rise. There's an interdependence. I don't know how to say this. We can't rise in a vertical hierarchy unless we have balanced completion. If you're incomplete on one plane of existence, and if you're unbalanced, if you try to raise to another level, you won't be able to succeed. You will fall back. This is an Aries Libra principle. You can't move forward or upward without balance. And the more you move forward and upward, the more you have balance. That if you try to sit on a bicycle standing still, you'll tip over. But if you go forward with the bicycle, you can go no hands. So there is a very distinct relationship then between the vertical and the horizontal. If you remember, the Egyptian mythology was exceedingly hierarchical, but the mythology of the Hindus was not. And the reason for this was that the Egyptian was very much centered on Re. And because it had that top, that goal or that ideal at the top, it developed the hierarchy all the way down the line. I think in the same way that preemptoral advancement or attempt at advancement in vertical hierarchy without having completed the balance has its complementation the other direction. Meaning to say, if you fulfill your horizontal organization, that you are a full spectral person, and that you know how to relate as an equal within each of the sectors or each of the colors in the color wheel, automatically that forces you up. You know how it goes. If you know something and you know the totality of it and you're not just a specialist, then you are raised to a position because people need someone who knows the whole view and has the whole experience of things. So again, there is in the vertical, depending on which direction you're going, there is both a push from behind by fulfillment and a pull from ahead or above, except if you're trying to go down in your hierarchy, that is due to aspiration or that is due to ambition. So the two of them interact very well with each other. All right. If you're weak, imbalanced, or specialized, you not only cannot go forward or upward, what you do is you drag down those that are above you and you push those that are down that are below you. I think we all understand all these things. These are in the famous story of the, what is the Valentine Rosicrucian story? Oh, okay. All right. If we understand this, then, that there is a relationship where one must be fulfilled in the horizontal before advancing in the vertical, and since there is limitation in each level of the horizontal, this means then that there must be something so that one can experience the totality of the horizontal plane before the advancement can take place. And it again seems like there are two things. One of them is centering. And the more one centers at the heart of the horizontal hierarchy, the more one understands how the spectrum of quality on that horizontal plane spills out all directions, how it is balanced in that. Now, it is a phenomenon. In fact, esotericists go so far to say, for example, Rudolf Steiner takes ideas that go way back to the pre-Socratic philosophers. In fact, they make a joke of it. A lot of the Socratic philosophers make a joke of it, that they claim that the whole cosmos was created by vortex, and then they call the great god vortex. And this is a notion that I think you'll find from your own experience, that the more that one is centering, either horizontally or vertically, the more things automatically circulate. And so then if one is focusing on the center of the activity in which one is participating, there is a rotary motion that is produced. very much like the rotary motion that takes place. If you're in the heart of your concentration exercise, everything starts spinning, and you even see a gigantic pinwheel of light begin to form, and things open up within that center. And when one experiences little nuggets of intuition, they spread out in all directions like rings from a stone thrown in the water. So what is necessary then to have a well-rounded either radial expression or differential expression within a radial plane is accomplished by concentration, one by a horizontal emanation and the other by a rotation. So that, of course, we're talking about something, in some cases the concentration is very long-standing. In one life we may be a primarily martial person, and in the next life we may be a mercurial person, and like through the maypole we may go through all of the different colors, but the concentration, before we can suddenly have fulfilled all of the things and unify them and raise to another level, that is one that goes beyond the human condition, or one where we understand the human condition thus far and we can see it from a little bit higher level. And so that there is that type of quality then. We will make it in 90 years. All right, so we understand then some of the relationships. We're just very lightly touching on some of the relationships of horizontal and vertical hierarchy. Both depend on concentration and understanding appropriateness. The horizontal depends upon balance, and that balance is accomplished by fulfilling your role and depending on the specialization of someone else to fulfill their role. When one has uniformly understood the entire horizontal plane, one can move forward. And the moving forward, I find it in my own life that because I have the desire to go deeper into spiritual understanding, I am brought, like it or not, to look at the spiritual worlds from many, many points of view. I'm being brought into a circulation, and it isn't just a simple, even the path that goes right straight up the trunk is a path that isn't a straight line of light alone. There's even circulation in that because it has the essence of everything that fans out into all of the different horizontal organizations around the way. And it seems to me, like my experience is that the more I aspire upward, the more I'm also brought downward into the root, but that's another principle of hierarchy we haven't gotten to yet. We may yet get to it. But the more I aspire upward, the more I am forced to circulate through all of the kinds of human experience, and the more I do so, the more rich I see that central light is, so that there's much more that can be seen from that. All right. After that long preamble on the principles of hierarchy, we're ready for the topic of this evening. But the whole course is like that. We had to tell stories and stories and stories because to just outright try to talk about things like this in the beginning would not have worked. Okay. The topic for tonight is the birth of the Olympic Titans. And that topic we're going to look at in terms of one very simple principle, which itself has all kinds of ramifications, most of which we won't be able to get. This is sort of a shorthand course that we talk about principles, and then we realize that there are many, 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 many more ways that they could be worked out, and it'd be terrible to spoil it for everybody else to try and work them all out anyway, because that would be avoiding the principle of horizontal organization, where you'd be trying to upstage what other people are trying to do or trying to do their job for them. If we remember, we've had some families along the way. We've had the children of Danis and the children of Egyptus a few years ago when we talked about Perseus. One brother had 50 sons and another brother had 50 daughters, and the brother that had the 50 sons moved away and became wealthy, and the brother that had the 50 daughters decided to cash in on that wealth by having his 50 daughters marry the 50 sons and murder them. He gave them all hatpins or something like that, and they all murdered their husbands on the wedding night. Except the last pair, the youngest son and daughter fell in love, and she couldn't do it. And this started the whole new kingdom up. We've also looked at the principle before when we've looked at fairy tales, where the first son or daughter doesn't succeed and the second son or daughter doesn't succeed, but the third or final son or daughter succeeds and brings something about. Remember when we did East of the Sun and West of the Moon, there was a whole brood in there, and it was the youngest one that actually succeeded in, but you remember she married the bear who was also a prince, and became very wealthy, much to the envy of all of her family. We also remember the principle that we're going to look at from when we looked at Egyptian hierarchy. Remember they had those organizations of pauts. Usually there were 3 pauts, but when we came to the pout of Heliopolis, it was actually a 12 pout. Well, there were some 9 pauts, but always one member of the pout or sub-pout always was transitional to the next sub-pout, or like a whole pout itself would be related to a pout that was below it or above it. So what we're trying to look at are beginnings, endings, and transitions in hierarchy, vertical hierarchy. And so we're going to look at the successive order of members in a generation, and then in succeeding talk we're going to talk about the successive order between generations. We did this a little bit when we looked at the descent from chaos, when we looked at the children of night and the children of discord. We went through a kind of devolution or degeneration of human experience through the different children, and things kept getting lower and lower and more terrible. This was sort of one of those snooty Greek ways of saying that going into matter was a lowbrow kind of thing to do. At that time, we just did it as sort of a general flow. And it was sort of like we were just diving down. This is the way ponds are formed, you know. We think of water circulating all over in a pond, but it really isn't that way. Like in a pond, there are actually levels. And those, if you dive and go very slowly down in a pond, you can feel that there are temperature gradients. And if you're very, very sensitive, you can see that there's different kind of biological activity that is taking place on different levels. And sort of what we did when we talked about the descent from chaos is we just sort of went down and felt it all. Now, this time we're not going to do that. We're going to look at the means and the extremes. And we're going to look especially at the extremes. And again, we're going to do a very abbreviated thing because we're only trying to get to a few ideas, and there are ideas that work in all kinds of things. There are people who have done very extensive works on this in psychology and in sociology and even in spirituality. That is, what is the firstborn child like? What are the middle kids like? And what is the last kid like? There are certain qualities that are to be found in each of them, and there are excellent books on that, so we won't go into that kind of detail. They do their job splendidly. When we've been looking at the grand chart of theogony, we've always been going in Western ways, from left to right in terms of firstborn and lastborn. Uranus was firstborn, Aurea was secondborn, and the lastborn was Pontos. In the case of Titans, or the lords, we began with Oceanus and we ended with Kronos. All right, so we're going to look at mostly those two people, and we're going to look mostly at Oceanus, because that's the way I do things. I always get started in beginnings, and by the time I get to the ends, there's nothing, there's too much to do, so I just quit. Now, if you remember, we talked some about Oceanus, which the Greeks would probably call Okeanos, because they liked those hard seas. That's why they were Greeks and they were in wars all the time, because they liked the hard seas and they didn't know how to come along with the soft seas. But Okeanos was somewhat, it was both similar and dissimilar to the Okeanos of the Orphic cosmogony. You remember this chart that we spent so long on? The last thing in the transcendental realm was the seventh septenary of the Okeanos, which was associated with Kabbalistically with the ring of Satan. Now, in some ways, the Okeanos of the Orphics and the Okeanos of the Olympics are similar, and in some ways they're dissimilar. They're dissimilar in that the Orphics saw Okeanos as lethal, as deathly, that the ring of Satan cut everything off. Where the Olympics, which we're now looking at now, the Olympic cosmogony, sees Okeanos as a life giver. And all life seems to come from it. Now, this is the same Okeanos, but it's all different from point of view. The Okeanos, as seen by the Platonists, was seen as a ring of selfhood that ended transcendental consciousness and plunged us into the material worlds which they thought were evil. They were quite Luciferic in their outlook, quite Oriental in their outlook, and they didn't like the whole idea of losing the spiritual worlds. They weren't really big on sacrifice. The only kind of sacrifice that was worth anything was to go down fighting. Ultimately, that one saw Okeanos as a life giver, and the other group saw them as a death giver, has nothing, those are just points of view about the same thing. It doesn't affect anything about the principle of primacy or ultimacy as we're trying to look at it. Those are just philosophical outlooks, and you have to be very careful about those things, because sometimes prejudices that we get from a given philosophical outlook biases us in such a way that we can't see what is the true principle because we're looking at the affect of our bias. If you will remember, when we were looking at the Orphic cosmogony, we said that the noetic realm, the realm of the life spirit, was the realm of Uranus. And we spoke of that realm as an extremely lively realm. And that in that realm there was a circulation. There was the outpouring in the celestial arc, or arch, that was called the proceeding, and there was the return flow that came in the subcelestial arch, and that the two of them together represented a circulatory wave-like motion where everything was alive. We spoke of that as being the circulation within the pure femininity of the life spirit, which is exceedingly fluent relative to the divine spirit, which is static in its willfulness. And we saw that there was that the light was a pure source of imagination. It would not have been correct to say that the circulation was a circle. Something can circulate and turn around without being a circle. Because if it had been a circle, it would have been an imagination rather than imagination. When you add the article, you add something definite. And imagination is a finality. It has a beginning and end to it. Whereas the pure imagination is lively. Remember when we played the dot game? When we were looking at the chaotic side of things, we said that anytime you precipitate a pattern, that pattern dies. Whereas the thing that, or the life, or the disorganization that produces that organization stays alive. And we looked at that as the relationship between the life, or between imagination with a capital I, pure imagination we're calling it, and imagination. However, when we come to the realm of the human spirit, it is not only possible to look at the circulation as a circle, but it is appropriate. That is, in Platonistic terms, when we come to the noetic realms, a circle is very appropriate. The noetic realm is the realm of ideas and of ideation. And the deepest, if we're looking at this in like levels of the hourglass, the deepest realms of the noetic, that is, those that are closest to the life spirit, are called, in Rosicrucian parlance, the germinal ideas of form. Those that are not so deep are the germinal ideas of life, and the shallowest ones, the closest to the phenomenal existence, are the germinal ideas of feeling, especially the germinal idea of the feeling of self. All right. Now, the Titanic brood that we're speaking of, Titans meaning lords, these 12, their place of existence, their home, just like our home is in the realm of concrete thinking, is we're exiles when we're here. We're strangers away from our home. Their home is in the deepest part of the realm of ideas and ideation. And the deeper that the ideas are, the more rare that they are, and the more close they are to pure truth. And the more close they are to pure truth, the more circular they are. You know, remember what a circular argument is like? You can't seem to get away from it. The closer you get to unity, so that by the time you get to the realm of life spirit, which is the truth without even an idea holding that truth, it's just pure truth, everything is unity. There isn't even a differentiation between one being and another. What counts in that realm is pure unity. So the ideas are the circular ideas in the germinal ideas of form. So it is not surprising that if we're doing a top-down view of creation, that the firstborn of the Titans would be Oceanus, or Okeanos, which would be represented by a circle or a point circle. And so Oceanus is, we're told, the belt that surrounds the world, or the belt of life that surrounds the world. And so that is in the deepest, the realm of germinal ideas of form. It is not the idea of life, but it is the idea of form that is capable of to give life some kind of distinct impression. So we have the firstborn being the first life form. So that brings us relevantly to firstborns. And that brings us to an idea that historically has a great deal of wear or use. It's the principle of primogeniture. The idea was touted that the firstborn got all the best of the genetic material. And therefore, whatever the quality, whatever the power of the parent was inherited by the firstborn. That's sort of what the quality was. The firstborn was the most fit, especially to inherit rule. This is why Bonnie Prince Charlie is going to inherit the crown of England, if there still is one, because he was the firstborn. Then the question that comes up is the firstborn, does the firstborn indeed get the best stuff passed on to it? And obviously the answer would be sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't. And if you read Shakespeare, this is the substance of a lot of his plots. That sometimes the second-born and sometimes even the bastard has more of the good stuff than the firstborn. The firstborn sometimes is a little bit dense. And it seems to have been, if you follow the whole history of poetry and drama, going all the way back to the Iliad and Odyssey. I'm not that familiar with the whole Mahabharata, but I suppose I'm going to have to get familiar with it. But poets and playwrights love to play with this idea because they strengthen the idea even when they detract from it. But something, even if it isn't the genetic best, is established by primogeniture. And so we want to look a little bit at that. So we'll take a little sally into the realm of psychologists or educators. And it's usually pretty obvious that with firstborn, the parents are most conscientious. And they're the most conservative. They have an attitude about the firstborn that they're going to do things right, and they're going to start out doing things right. And as a consequence, the values of the parents' generation are most put upon the firstborn. And the firstborn carry them. Even if they struggle with them and try to rebel against them, they end up still being very, very conservative. So the thing that is passed on by primogeniture is stability, conservativeness. Now, if a generation is sort of like a horizontal, because even if you're circulating through a horizontal, you're still progressing, so there is a little bit of forward-goingness or raising, so that by the time you've gotten around from the circle, from the firstborn to the lastborn, things have progressed a little bit, and it isn't completely, perfectly horizontal. What you're trying to do within one generation is you're trying to maintain a stability. And so when you pass things on to the firstborn from generation to generation, you try to maintain a stability. It doesn't take much of a study of history, especially it's most dramatically found in Chinese history, that when there's a change of dynasty, boy, it's a radical change, and there's a lot of social instability. The whole period of the War of Roses in England, when dynasties were passed back and forth, was a period of very great instability. And so we see then that if there is, that the principle of primogeniture is then a quality of stability. Thus, the firstborn of a generation sets the tone, or it sets the intent for the entire generation. This is like the seed, it's like the first action, it's like the first breath of the horoscope. First breath of that you take sets the tone for your entire life. What you intend to do in this generation or in this life cycle is determined by the first breath. The last breath is something very different. We'll get to that. But this is sort of like the first day of spring. And there are people that actually, by taking what happens at the moment of the vernal equinox, they look at what the heavens are like at that moment, and they can tell what the whole summer, or indeed the whole cycle, is going to be like. You can do that with any major turning point. Some people do it. That's what the 12 days of Christmas are about. If you take from the point of the solstice and take the next 12 days, they indicate what the next 12 months are going to be like what happens in those days foreshadows. Yeah, there are people. There's a man that a few years ago lived up in Minneapolis, and he was a garageman, and he had weather records going way, way, way back, and he knew what the average temperatures were and what the average precipitations were and things like that. And he watched minute by minute, hour by hour, what the 12 days of Christmas were like.
And he got so that he could order snowplows for his garage weeks ahead of time because he knew because he went completely. It's like coming events cast their shadows, and those shadows are cast in the same way that we predict what's going to happen in the horoscope according to the first breath. Like what you have set the tone for is like what the firstborn is like. So the principle that we're trying to get here is that the opening, like what piece that you move first in the chessboard, that it engenders what the whole game is going to be like. So the opening, the first motion, first action determines this whole cycle, the whole generation. So that if you start something at an appropriate time and place, and you make your first action appropriate, you have, in a way, really gotten off on the right foot. This is why starting of events like the founding of a religion or the laying of a cornerstone of a building, all of these things, like if we are free people, we know what we're doing and we choose to start things, to start our primogeniture at just the right time. However, by the time that we come to the last child, our resolve has been weakened. And not only that, we have experienced a lot. And when we've experienced a lot, we look at things differently. So last children, parents always seem to know that somebody's going to be a last child, especially if somebody's a dramatically last child. So that is after, like 20 years worth of children, you know that this is the end. Last children are treated very differently than first children. And last children, parents have almost been saying to themselves, we've worked so hard on keeping our values and making our point through the conservativeness from the first children, that when it comes, and it didn't work. Because another generation is another generation. They're on another level of the pine tree. And we can pass some things on from generation, but it didn't work. So let's just love this last one to pieces and let's treat it differently. So, last children are usually quite different from all of the other children, but especially the first. And this is where one of the big things comes in, that is a primary principle in all of astrology, is that adjacent signs are the most different of all signs. It isn't opposite signs or square signs, it is adjacent signs. So that if Aries is the first child, where there is really resolute and decisive action, Pisces is the last child, and Pisces, let's face it, are different. Aries only looks forward. It's unburdened by any history, and it's got a single pointedness. Whatever is in front of it, that's where it goes. It has to conquer. Pisces, on the other hand, is complicated, and it's inhibited by overwhelming experience, and it looks back, trying to make the connections between all of this experience so that it can return to that simple kind of unity. Aries is very decisive as the firstborn, and Pisces is very wavering as the lastborn. Aries is singular to the point that it wears uniforms. Pisces is different. Pisces would like to try to wear all different types of clothing all at the same time. So, the quality is that there is more deviacy from the original intent, and that makes new things possible. and that means a new cycle can start because there are new unknowns, because we've deviated from what we know we wanted things to be. Experience has done that. So it is always, even though the rulership may be given to the first child by inheritance, but when things are broken down and a dynasty has to change and the kingdom is going to pot, it is always the last child, usually the third in the fairy tales, that accomplishes this, because the last child is most fit to do something different. Only that last child is capable of being different and bringing in a new order. So deviation and difference are what make something new possible. So ultimates represent something foreign, something very foreign. Now, if we look at pouts as the Egyptians did, we had like the tree of light, the changing of order was quite removed. It was purely vertical. But we're talking about a generation that is all in one plane. That means to say that the opening cusp of Aries is also the closing cusp of Pisces. Now this is because we're talking about a circulation through a generation. Because in a generation there is a circle. So the realm and the place in the realm of Okeanos is the same as that of Kronos. That is, they are both at the deepest level of the realm of ideas, the realm of geminal ideas of forms. However, the big difference is that Okeanos represents the simplest, most unified forms, those that are circular, the most perfect of the geometric figures. Whereas Kronos represents the geometric figures, the straight line figures, where there's more geometricity, where there's more angularity, more rectilinearity. So they are, even though they represent the same era, they have the same kind of unity. They have the ideas of Kronos and their geometricity, they are more pyramidal in nature, whereas Okeanos is purely circular. We're going to come back to these things again. So they do share a quality that Kronos and Okeanos do share a quality that is the same point, even though one is very circular and one is very geometric, so that they have a cold separative element. One is the circle of Satan, and the other is the separative quality of isolation and segregation according to geometric form. Just in the same way that Pisces and Aries share spring. So we have roughly looked at initials and ultimates as they are in cycles. They're both in the same place, only one is for starting, one is for finishing, one is for deviation and difference, one is to maintain a constancy and a unity. So that the attitude at the beginning of something that we start to do is different than something at the end of what we want to do. So we've got two principles of horizontal unity. We're saying that at one level, if we concentrate and maintain equality and concentrate not only on the center but the segment of the pie that we are in, we help everyone else in our horizontal relationship to be fulfilled. That is, whether we're playing our notes or whether we're playing a small guard rather than a power forward, or whether we're playing the role of an equal but opposite mate, the concentration on the unity that is our marriage and the concentration on what we have to offer on the horizontal provides that kind of organization. But we have another principle that in a circulation within a generation, that the beginnings of things and the ultimacy of things based on purity of creative life versus experience, because Chronos is time and is history and has the geometric quality, is what fulfills something horizontal. So that the deeper that we are in a project, the more we should rely on history, but not history to remain the same, but history to become different, to carry out the idea to its ultimacy so that we can move on to the next idea. So we have some principles of the horizontal, and we're ready in the future now to go on to other things. We could have looked at this more linearly as we did with Ra, or Re, and that would have been good. We could have looked at the inclusions and exclusions. We didn't look at that. And we could have looked at the nature of lordliness, and we'll come to that eventually. And one other subject that we could have looked at is the other children of the other incestuous union of Gaia. Not only did Gaia sleep with her first son and produce the Cyclops, the giants, and the Titans, but she also slept with her youngest son, Pontos, who means of the salt sea. The Hellespont is the sea of the Hellenes, that is the Greeks. And she slept with her son, and she had a brood by him, and they are called the children of the sea. And this is another whole big line of descent. And the children of the sea actually interact with the Titans, and they interact with the children of chaos. Only the children of the sea are Nereus, which means they're all males, which means wet one. Thaumas, which means wonderful. Phorkys, which means boar. Keto, which means sea beast. This is where Ketus, the great sea beast on the zodiac, comes from. And Eurybia, meaning wide power. They interact, especially with some of the children of Okeanos. Not all of the Titans seem to have highly fertile unions. Okeanos had a number of children, and some of them interacted with the children of the sea, the children of Nereus especially, and all of the Nereids were born from them. But all of the children of the sea, for the most part, were monstrosities, like the Gorgons and the dragon at the end of the earth, and all of those things were born from the children of the sea. Iapetus had a lot of children. The ones that we know, most of the children of Iapetus were forethought and afterthought, Prometheus and Epimetheus. And the line of descent that we're going to follow are the children of Kronos, which is where the gods were born from the Titans out of the children of Kronos. All right, we have seen a kind of circulatory fulfilling of a cycle within a generation that is something like a hierarchy, but it helps us to understand a horizontal organization, and if you will allow me the oxymoron, horizontal hierarchy. Now what we are going to do in the next few talks is we're going to talk about intergenerational changes and struggles, and we're going to talk about now the relationship of Cronus and his father Uranus in the castration of Uranus. And then we're going to talk about the birth of the gods, most notably Zeus, and then we're going to talk about Cronus' comeuppance from Zeus and what happens to the Titans, and we're going to sort of relate those through generations because it's very important to understanding the whole of our spiritual quest now, because the castration of Uranus in reverse is what we're trying to do by union with Christ. We have to go back the same way we came, and that the transition from Uranus to Kronos to Zeus, which is what our true nature is, our self-nature is Zeus-like, that the return of that, there are specific hierarchical and internal consciousness attitudes, and those are the things that we're going to study in the next few weeks. And then we'll have all of the amores of Zeus to deal with, which have to do with the fulfillment of our own spiritual consciousness and our own spiritual being. And we'll be as busy as Zeus was, only not quite in the same way, except if you understand as the Neoplatonists do. I'm sure the Neoplatonists would approve of this talk tonight. It's it's right along. I'm sorry that I just stuck with one or two simple principles, but we're trying to get at hierarchy, and we won't always have a lot of storytelling. Yes, great.
I forgot. Why do we have the kings, the children of night are going in the northern direction?
Well, that's just to show the other direction. That would be the dark side of things. The children of night would be more like seeing it from the viewpoint of spirit losing itself in matter. The children of Gaia are more from the viewpoint of spirit asserting itself in a creative way and manifesting its creation in the beautiful, glorious organization of cosmos. They're the same thing, but from different points of view. In fact, we still have that from the Orphic cosmogony. We still have the plane of Adrastia to deal with yet, and that'll deal with that topic, the relationship of the two, the dark side of creation versus the light side of creation. There has to be a unification of that, just as there has to be a unification between our misdeeds and our virtues, because they reside in the same principles. And when we come to Zeus, that's one of the things that we have to deal with, is the connecting up of all of these things. Because in the birth of selfhood, we produce universes, and in those universes, everything has to be connected up together. Because the realm of Zeus is also the realm of Poseidon, which is Neptune, and that is the connector. Zeus is very much like the figure of